it's Emily here, and I'm finally doing my end of June wrap up. Even though it's not that late, because it's only July 2nd when I'm filming this, but I feel like it's late because usually I'm more on top of it than this. But I've been super busy this week and super duper tired all the time, and you guys don't care. So let's just get to the 5 books I read the last couple weeks of June. The first book I finished was City of Ashes, which is the second book in the Mortal Instruments series, and it is by Cassandra Clare. Unfortunately, I can't really give you a whole lot of details about this book, but in case you aren't aware of the Mortal Instruments series, it is a young adult urban fantasy series where this girl, Clary, discovers these shadow hunters, and they are people who fight demons, and discovers that there's way more to the world than she realized, and all of the stories are true, basically. And I think this is one of my least favorites of the series. There's a certain plot line with a certain couple that I'm just really not a fan of, and you're kind of in the thick of it in this book, and you kind of just have to push through it. Thankfully, there are characters like Simon and Magnus who kind of save things for me, and I just basically live for the moments where they are there, and I would give it 3 stars for this reread. I then listened to the audiobook for a book called Justice Calling. It is the first book in the 20-sided Sorceress series by Annie Bellett. And this was super duper short, which was why I picked up the audiobook, because the audiobook is like only 4 hours long, which is really, really short. It feels almost more like a novella, and it's just one of those times where I felt like the book could have been longer, and I maybe would have gotten into it a little bit more. And the premise of it is really cool. It is this sorceress, Jade Crow, and she lives in Idaho. I'm pretty sure it's Idaho. And she owns a gaming comic book shop, which is awesome. And then someone from the kind of like where government type of thing comes to her place and accuses her of being a murderer, and things go from there. And it was more entertaining than I thought it would be. I really enjoyed it more than I thought, because I kind of saw it. It didn't really seem to have a ton of good reviews, but the premise of it was interesting, and I really like urban fantasy, and so I thought it was something fun, and it was definitely fun. Although I think because of how short the book was, I don't think it gave me enough time to really dive into the world and the characters and really go attached, because it kind of was just like going non-stop, which can be good, but it didn't seem like it was in a good way. But at the same time, I was so pleasantly surprised. So the jury is still out on whether or not I will continue with this series. Then I read Heart's Blood by Julia Marillo. Or is it Marillier? Marillier? One of the two? And I did a buddy read with Roya Hellvetter from Unicorn Hunting Books, and this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And I don't know if it's young adult. I think it is technically young adult, but from what I could tell, it's one of those books that really could go general fantasy or young adult. I think both would really appreciate it, because the style of writing didn't seem to go either way, which I thought was really kind of cool and refreshing. And I really enjoyed this book. It was a more traditional historical fantasy, and it's about this girl who actually is a scribe, and she is running away from some tragic circumstances in her past, and she goes to this castle to get a job as a scribe, where she meets the character who is supposed to be the Beast. Now, I was slightly nervous about this book at first, because in the book description on the book cover, talks about how the Beast character has a disability, and I was super, super worried, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be like the disability is a curse, and then he's gonna like be magically healed, and it's gonna be awful. But his disability had nothing to do with the curse, and that was really, really awesome. I still think there's a little bit more they could have done with his character, because a lot of his character was still focused on the disability, and you could barely have a conversation with him or about him that didn't include that. But all things considering, it could have been way worse, and I was very happy with how the view of it ended up evolving with the different characters and how the main character particularly saw him, I really, really liked. And yeah, so I gave this book 4 stars. And then I read Seeking Mansfield by Kate Watson. This is a contemporary young adult retelling of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. And oh my goodness, guys, the adorable. Because up until this point, all month, I've been reading books I've genuinely been enjoying and I've really liked, but I felt like it had been a while since I read a book where I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And Seeking Mansfield was definitely that book. It was so adorable. I thought that she did such a great job of translating the story of Mansfield Park into a modern and teenage setting. The characters were all adorable, like super adorable, and I just loved it. I just loved it. It made me so happy. I gave it 4.5 stars, mainly because the beginning was a little bit slow and it took me a little bit to get into it. But beyond that, I thought this book was super, super cute. And so if you like contemporaries and you like Jane Austen, you'll like this book. And then I continued with my reread of the Mortal Instruments series, and so I read The City of Glass next. And this book I enjoyed much more than City of Ashes. Some of the characters that I really enjoy, I think, really start coming into their own in this book. And the plot line that I like finally comes to conclusion, and that was super exciting. And I'm just super grateful for that because I just kind of pushed through that part of the story that I'm not a fan of. And yeah, and I just felt like there was more character development and just more happened, and we got a little bit of a deeper look into the Shadowhunter world, so I gave it 4 stars. And finally, there is this thing hosted by Sam's Nonsense called The Hop-Along, where she is reading books by Robin Hobb. And she's kind of a slightly classic fantasy writer, kind of like started writing like the 80s and the 90s, that I had never read before. And so I was like, sure, I'll try some Robin Hobb. And so thankfully, the first book in her 5-series trilogy called The Assassin's Apprentice was only like $2 or $3 on Kindle. And I had a free credit for Audible, so I downloaded both the Kindle book and the Audible book, and I listened to it in the car. So I will say that I wasn't a huge fan of the narrator for the audiobook. I listened to the first half on audio, and even when I was listening to it at a little bit of an accelerated speed, I felt the audiobook was just kind of boring and slow, and it was an interesting idea, but I just couldn't get into it. But then I decided just to switch to reading the Kindle, and it was so much better. So if you want to try this series out, I definitely recommend not listening to the audiobook, just on my personal preference. And it is just about this boy who is taken in at a young age, and he is the bastard son of the prince, although the prince, I believe, has abdicated his throne. And the stable hands kind of take him under their wing, but then the king comes along and decides to raise him up to be an assassin because he thinks it would be helpful to him politically. But I did really like getting to know all the characters. It's definitely a book if you really like animals. If you want a book about an animal lover, you'll really like this because he has like a special connection to animals and dogs and stuff, and I really, really like that. I will definitely say there are some trigger warnings from a very outside, not professional perspective. I personally think the character has depression, and so there could be warnings for that. Again, that's not official. I don't know if that's accurate or not. That was just kind of the interpretation I had. But there are some other trigger warnings for physical abuse and suicidal thoughts. And then they do kind of allude to other sexual abuse, I think, if I interpreted it correctly. But it wasn't something that you saw on screen, at least the sexual abuse part. The physical abuse and the suicidal thoughts you do see on screen, on page, but the other stuff you don't necessarily see on page, but they do kind of reference to it. So I do want to give the trigger warnings for that. Overall, I'm giving this book 3.5 stars just because it took me so long to get into it, and I did really enjoy the last half, not as much as I've liked some other epic fantasy books along the same genre. And there you go. the books that I read at the end of June. So it was a pretty decent reading month. I really want to get more books where I'm like falling in love with them, because I just feel like I'm not really in a reading slump, but I'm in this reading phase where I'm reading books that I'm enjoying, but I'm not loving. And so if you have recommendations for books that you think I'm going to like completely fall in love with, let me know. So let me know what you read this month. If you read any of these books, let me know your thoughts. I would love to discuss them with you. And I will hopefully see you all soon when I will have more energy to film more videos. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!